Thank you very much. It's a great pleasure to be here today. KETA is an amazing organization, and the presentation you just saw shows what great things can be done. There are amazing new opportunities that are created by the Korean-U.S. trade agreement. The Korean-U.S. trade agreement is the first major trade agreement by the United States that the U.S. has entered into of a bilateral sort since NAFTA, the North American Free Trade Agreement. That's nearly 20 years ago. The chorus would not have been possible 20 years ago to have anything like the content that it has today. With respect to the NAFTA, the North American Free Trade Agreement, we had geographic proximity. If you look at Canada, most of the population sort of hugs the the northern border of the United States. And most trade is not east-west within Canada. It's north-south from Canada to the United States and from the United States to Canada, including an integrated automobile industry in Detroit and Windsor, Ontario. In fact, when you drive north in the United States, what you get is increasingly sparse population. So less and less people, smaller farms, and all of a sudden you cross the border and there's Canada. And to Canada, that's the south, when they're not all in Florida for the winter. When you're in Mexico, we had a program called Maquiladora, which was a outward processing in Mexico where labor was cheaper, right along the border. So it was natural to have economic integration geographically. What's changed now is the Internet and global supply chains, so that it is easy due to transportation and due to the Internet. And actually, one advantage is the time difference, is that someone in the United States can order something, and there's somebody in Korea who's awake who can fill that order, and there's a seamless relationship that exists. So for 20 years, the U.S. entered into a number of FTAs. You saw a number of free trade agreements on the wonderful slides that were here. Most of these FTAs for the United States were political. So we had Morocco, not so very much trade. We had Israel, a political reason. Jordan, another political reason to have that trade. The three most recent FTAs in the United States were Panama, Colombia, and Korea. The one with real economic content, big economic content, prospectively, and actually is with Korea. So this is something new for the United States. The United States had put all of its hopes, as many of us did in many countries, in the WTO, in the Doha round of negotiations, which began in 2001. Doha failed because there was not a number of countries seeing eye to eye on what they wanted to accomplish. So the Indians and the Brazilians and the Chinese, for various reasons, said, we don't want to open our markets further right now. You can give us things unilaterally, all the rest of the countries. But that was not a way to have a negotiation. With Korea, there is reciprocity. There's give and take. There's a reason why we entered into this agreement. There's the possibility for economic integration in a way that there wasn't with a number of other countries. So what we have is tremendous opportunities. This is a snapshot of pre-chorus trade. Korea has a surplus with the United States, but this is like a threshold. This is the beginning. This is a snapshot of what things have been, not so bad. I mean, there's a lot that comes from Korea into the United States. You have Hyundai and Kia. You have engineering services. You have a number of other areas in electronics. You'll find in most living rooms in the United States a large flat screen television. That's from Korea. But what's happening now, has been pointed out in the slides that you just saw, is economic integration of a much deeper sort. What we have today is supply chains. That's new. That's different. It didn't exist previously to anything like the degree it does today. What came in was finished products. 20, 30, 40 years ago, what came in was rubber-soled footwear, sports footwear. What came in was garments. But now there's global integration. This is what an economist at university here thought would happen after 10 years in Korea. An expansion of gross domestic product by 6%. A third of a million additional jobs. Exports up to the U.S. by $1.33 billion. Imports from the U.S. to increase by close to $900 million. Trade impact plus $464 million a year. These are probably very low estimates. They are also, this economist is probably not going to contribute very much to this trade balance. You will contribute to the trade balance. This is made up of that last slide. That's individuals in this room and people like you who are producing things, producing goods, producing services, and investing. And economists, bless them, are actually just describing what they think might happen. You will make things happen. That's the difference. So it depends on the efforts of Korean business, individually and collectively, and it depends on the facilitation that can take place. Organizations like KETA, I've never seen anything like KETA anyplace else in the world. Closest is Germany. Germany cares about exports. They have in Shanghai hundreds of people, Germans, who are helping to facilitate inward sales into China and sales of Chinese goods purchased by German companies into Germany. They also have research institutions called Fraunhofers, which are located all around the world, but in Germany, who are helping to make innovation take place. Innovation is two things. It's invention and commercialization. Because if there's no commercialization, the innovation is sort of academic. So Germany knows how to reach out in a way that the United States does not. I haven't seen the most recent figures, but there are many research facilities of Korean companies in China. They're thinking about how to serve that vast, very quickly growing market and the global market. And that makes a difference. There are many, many American companies over there as well. But in terms of consumer electronics, Korea has something of an edge. You need advice in the U.S. market as well. And my colleagues will be talking about the government procurement market. They'll be talking about the intellectual property protection. What they're talking about is facilitating business, making business take place. This is just a slide to show what happened in one instance. Korea has a number of FTA partners, some of more significance. We have actually, in the U.S., we have a free trade agreement with Chile. We have a free trade agreement with Singapore. We do not have one with the European Free Trade Agreement. We have some relations with ASEAN. We are working on a bilateral investment treaty with India, but it hasn't progressed very far. But Korea has these FTA partners. And this is just to show you, with emphasis on FTAs with these countries, that trade has surged with Chile, just one country, which is a small country, alone, has gone up by 3 or 4 times. And the EU, of the most important substantive agreements that Korea has are with, in terms of content, the EU and the U.S. in terms of economic promise. So the bottom line is your FTA program has been very substantial. Would it be better to do everything in the WTO? Yes, not possible. China has said, well, we're not interested. We gave a lot in 2001 to join, and we don't want to move forward. India says if we lower our barriers, and Brazil says if we lower our barriers, the Chinese will come in and take over our industries. We're not interested. So there's no... Geneva right now is, with a few exceptions, stalled. But FTAs have some promise. That's why we're not just being promiscuous, or if there is promiscuity, it's the United States has dated some of the wrong partners from the point of view of economics. From the view of politics, may be different. What I want to go through is some of the core contractual obligations that countries have to live up to, and I want to also emphasize intangible benefits. The word intangible has a lack of solidity to it. What it means is bureaucrats in both countries, which I'll get to, meet with each other, they get to understand each other, and when there's an issue, they get to solve problems together. So there is a momentum to an FTA. That's not just what's written on the paper that was finished in March. Nothing finished. That was a beginning. And the relationships among regulatory agencies are what is going, and businesses, are what's going to make Chorus have its benefits. So today what I want to talk about is getting the most benefit out of Chorus, how to do it, that it has been an extraordinarily important achievement for the two governments and for their private sectors, but it depends upon you, people like you in this room, to make it actually have great results with the help of experts, such as those in our firm who understand intellectual property, they understand government procurement, they understand contracts, they understand real estate. You will need some advice from those who are familiar with specialized areas. But we're all in the same business, Kita, our firm, and you, to make this work. And I believe that it will happen. What I hope to do is give you a bit of a snapshot about what is a complicated document, the Chorus itself, to talk about the fact that we've entered into a new phase, implementation, that we can help you solve problems and avoid prospective problems, and to expand Chorus's coverage. Again, everything depends upon human energy, and Korea has no shortage of that. We can assist you in approaches to governments. We can assist you to solve issues through diplomatic means. That merely means government people talking to each other. And if everything else fails, I want to show you with respect to NAFTA that there has been litigation and it has resolved problems, and we can assist you with respect to litigation should that be necessary. So we move on to implementing Chorus. And what lessons are there from NAFTA? Because we've had now 19 years of NAFTA. I'd say you're very fortunate to have Kita, because one thing you have to do is follow what's going on. Progress is being made. Meetings are being held. KETA can keep you currently informed. We can keep you currently informed and assist where necessary. Government, this would surprise you, but government officials actually don't make anything. And they're not actually in the business of selling any goods. And they don't know what market is very often, mostly. They do not know what markets want. It is businesses that know what markets want and anticipate demand. So the burden, actually, of making this agreement work falls largely on people like you and yourselves. But you have to understand what governments need to make this work, because what we are involved in, and what I have been involved in for now more decades than many of you have to your lives, is supporting government. Government does not have as much expertise as you would fear or you would like. Government, it does not know what's going to sell very well next year. They may not even know what's selling very well now. So they can be of assistance, but you are staffing the government. Our business in our law firm very often is to show you how to staff the government. And the government actually is mostly thankful. Not always very thankful, but mostly thankful. Sometimes it's like helping an older person to cross the road. Very often they wanted to cross the road. Sometimes they didn't want to cross the road. But you're going to help them cross that road nevertheless. So we assist in interpreting course and other agreements, the WTO agreements. We monitor the trade agreement implementation. We help it to facilitate trade and investment. I mean, very often you will open up an office in the United States ultimately when business will support such an office, and that's an investment. And investors have certain rights under these agreements. You should not take what's in the agreement as written in stone. It is something that can be altered. It can be improved. It can be added to. There can be mistakes made at the border in terms of classification. Customs officials are only human, sometimes a little too human, but if you have something that's a complicated auto part, or you have something that's an integrated circuit, actually they will not have a clue what it is. It has to have the right documentation. And it may come in under the wrong category, and it may not meet a content requirement in terms of enough of it being Korean. Again, KETA will help you with the general rules. We will help you not only on occasion with the general rules, but we can help you solve a particular problem, because the border is to disappear largely. That is our objective, so that there is seamless international trade. There will be problems behind the border, standards problems, and your participation in helping to set the standards, and our participation, American business, to help set the standards to begin with and participate in an open process is really very necessary, because we now have negotiations being thought about for the first time with Europe in the United States, called a transatlantic partnership. And our worst problems are standards. To give you one example, we like dipping our chickens in chlorine to get rid of salmonella disease, germ. The Europeans don't like that at all. They want to do something entirely different. So they're not happy with our chlorinated chickens, our chlorinated birds. We set out to have the same objective, health, but we use different methods. And those different methods cause a trade barrier unnecessarily, because we could have sat down, scientists could have sat down, people from the industry could have sat down together originally and thought up a similar way of evolving a standard, or for pharmaceuticals besides food, or for safety, a safety device. We all have different safety standards for automobiles, for example. We're trying to have the same objective. We would like our people not to get thrown through the windshield when their car stops suddenly because it hits a brick wall. But we didn't sit down initially together. These agreements will help us sit down initially together and work together towards a common problem-solving methodology. So first we should understand how broad CHORUS is, to know what is covered, what's not covered, what could be covered. This is a horrible slide, something of an eye test. But this is just to tell you the agreement is very comprehensive. And there are some basic provisions, and then there are provisions by sector. There are specific ways of addressing certain problems. There are provisions about trade remedies, because there will always be some times when injury is caused to an industry because of rapid change in trade flows, and there are limits on what a country can do, but rights as well as to what a country can do in regulating trade when injury is caused. Financial services are extraordinarily important now. They are the river on which trade flows now. There has to be some money involved. There has to be the facilitation of trade through financial services. Marketing of financial services also is a means of having greater integration across borders. Things like insurance and banking, telecommunications. No agreement goes as far as I would go with respect to telecommunications. If I turn on my iPhone in this country and have the data services working, it will cost me $1,000 for about a half day, because the fee system and the taxes are very high on telecommunications. That is strangling not only world commerce, but communication among families. And there has to be an improvement. When the developing countries in Geneva at the WTO say, you really weren't thinking about us when you put together this international agreement, I would say we were thinking about growth. Information technology adds 0.5% of gross domestic product to the United States every year, and in a developing country, it's 2 to 3%. And this is not something academic. This is about creating markets. Most of the world's consumers are actually outside the United States, and most of the world's consumers are outside of Korea. So we have to serve world markets. And if telecommunications is taxed, if telecommunications is interfered with by saying, we want the server, the electronic means, actually you build servers, we build servers. If everybody says we want the internet servers in our country, that's not the way the internet works. The internet works by having servers wherever it is most efficient to have the servers. And e-commerce is extremely important now to the global economy. So we have a beginning in CHORUS, but we don't have all the answers. That's why it's a living agreement. It will continue to be improved, but it will be improved by the activities of people like the people in this room who say, well, wait a moment, I was trying to do this transaction and I ran into a very heavy cost with respect to my communications, or something else, the financing of the transaction was difficult. These things go hand in hand, they work together. to make world trade grow. Government procurement is something that my colleague will be speaking about shortly. It's a vast area for sales, both of goods and services, and holds great promise. Intellectual property rights, another colleague of mine will be speaking to this. If there is no intellectual property protection, or very limited intellectual property protection, or the wrong IP protection, then again, world trade is strangled. The reason that your companies and ours do not put their core technologies into China right now is because of inadequate protection of intellectual property. In Korea, I believe, and certainly in the United States, there is pretty good protection of intellectual property, but you've got to know how to protect it, and that will be addressed shortly. There are new provisions with respect to labor and the environment. We'll get to that. Transparency is very important. How did the government make its decision? What agencies made what decisions? Where are they published? How do you know what the rules are? So transparency, openness of information is very important. There are also exceptions, and it is clear that for law enforcement there has to be an exception if there's anti-competitive practices, cartels, price fixing. There has to be an exception. This is free trade, but it's not free of all forms of regulation. Unsafe food, there are going to be regulations. Anti-prudential, non-prudential matters, regulation for prudential means, making sure that banks and insurance companies have adequate capital, that sort of thing. Something the United States has not perfected domestically, but there are exceptions for a number of these things. National security, called often essential security. There will be exceptions. This is a very comprehensive agreement. I've only touched upon some of the subjects. What are the basic rules? National treatment. It sounds a little complex, sounds a little like lawyers speaking. National treatment only means you, Koreans, and we Americans in each other's market must be treated no worse than the best treatment that any domestic company is given. So it's not just average, it's not better than the lowest treatment, it is the same treatment as the best that is given to any domestic company. Minimum standard of treatment, this is for investors, that there's international law as to what the basic minimums are with respect to treatment. And probably not a big issue, we hope, between our two countries, but no expropriation without fair compensation. Expropriation can be many things. We'll get to some examples. Expropriation is not simply Cesar Chavez in Venezuela grabbing a company. It can be making it impossible to do business the way you thought you'd be able to do business because of environmental rules or something else. And this is just a quote which says there has to be a public purpose when something is taken. It has to be non-discriminatory. Can't just be we take Korean investments. It has to be taken for the same reasons no matter what the nationality is. Koreans have the same rights in the United States as Americans do. And if there were a taking, my home was taken to build a school when I was, actually I was in college by then. Things are taken for public purposes, but there has to be compensation that's prompt, adequate, and effective. My own view was I wanted them, we were kids in my neighborhood. We petitioned to have the school torn down. It was built in 1896. It needed to be torn down. And have the foundation made into a swimming pool. Not practical, but it was our idea. It didn't happen. knowing where and how to intervene. You need expert assistance to know how to affect change in a direction that is helpful. This is another, these next two slides are only to show you that there is a lot that has been set up in terms of machinery to make this agreement work. It is quite dramatic. A lot of officials will be spending a lot of time making this agreement work and making it work better and expanding on the rights under the agreement. The Joint Committee just means the ministers. The ministers meet usually once a year. And then there are committees on goods, products, trade and agriculture, textiles and apparel, medicines, medical devices. SPS is sanitary and phytosanitary measures. That's what I was talking about. The Europeans don't like that we dip our chickens in chlorine. It may not sound very appetizing. It depends whether you want salmonella or not. We think of their chickens as sort of being dirty, but they may be tastier. The technical barriers to trade, going to be extremely important. That means standards, product standards. An automotive working group. Our automobile companies were not big enthusiasts for the U.S.-Korea agreement, you may have noticed. And the automotive working group will, over time, make things work, we hope, smoothly. A group on trade remedies. In the past, there have been anti-dumping and countervailing duty cases. There tend to be less when trade is integrated across a border. We don't have very many cases against Canada at all anymore. The tariffs are down, the trade flows in two directions. Just like within the states, the 50 American states, there are no trade actions against each other. There can't be. But there's no motivation to have trade actions against each other. As supply chains cross borders, the reason that a company would like to stop trade coming in diminishes almost to the vanishing point. So frictions, trade frictions, tend to disappear. And there are other groups on professional services, financial services, insurance, government procurement, labor, environment, fisheries, and investment in services, and a working group on small and medium-sized enterprises to make sure that the benefits are extended not just to the big multinationals, but to smaller and medium-sized enterprises as well. And I might say that that's where most of the employment comes from in our country and in your country, from SMEs, small and medium enterprises. And for the first time, pretty much in the last few years, there's the ability to leap across borders because of the Internet and to serve foreign customers a great distance away, and with logistics get goods and services to them. Now, some things are not entirely solved by course. There will still be some trade remedy cases from time to time, I think fewer as time goes on. There will be issues with customs valuation, always is. Parenthetically, I mean, the way tariff schedules are set up cause certain trade to take place. Sports footwear exists because somebody came up with the idea that if you put a leather top on top of rubber-soled footwear, the tariff was about 1/10 of what it used to be, because it went into a different category of cheap value leather. So customs valuation is going to matter. It will matter I represent the semiconductor industry and have for years. We work closely with KSIA, the Korean Semiconductor Industry Association, and 4 other associations in China, EU, and Japan and Chinese Taipei. Does something come in and is it a part of an auto? Or is it a multi-component semiconductor? One will be at 0, and the other may be at 9 or 12%. So you actually want to pay a good deal of attention to customs classification. Horrible subject, I must say, extraordinarily boring, but it involves money, and it involves whether trade can take place. And these new devices, we're getting a new agreement. One thing I'm working on microelectronic mechanical semiconductors. What are these things? When you hit a brick wall in your car, the thing that deploys the airbag is a MEM, a microelectronic mechanical semiconductor, because there's a sensor that says, sudden deceleration, namely you hit the wall, and transmits that into an electrical signal in the same little package, and that deploys the airbag, or tells you what your tire pressure is, or tells you whether you're backing up across your neighbor's dog, which could be regrettable, especially if you want to be on good terms with your neighbor. So these devices with sensors built in, well, what are they? Are they a part of a refrigerator? Or are they part of a car? Or are they what's called a microcomponent semiconductor? So customs valuation is going to be key, and you get to work on it with some technical assistance. Inward direct investment. We help companies cross borders to go through our clearance processes and to actually have the contracts work. Government procurement, we will have a separate discussion of. Standard setting, we've talked about. Sanitary and phytosanitary issues. You know, we all care about food safety, but we haven't agreed on what the standards are. That requires a lot of work to know what's acceptable and what isn't. We don't like melamine in our pet food, which is a Chinese example. So there will be issues with respect to sanitary and phytosanitary issues. Or when is beef disease-free? Big issue for those countries that export beef to make sure that the cows don't fall over and cause serious difficulties for those who consume the beef. Visas. You know that now Korean businessmen and Korean tourists have additional openness across the U.S. border and vice versa. All of these things, if there's an issue, just to be understood or just to solve a problem, our firm, McKenna Long&Aldridge, can assist. So what are the lessons from NAFTA? It only took me, I don't know, a half hour to get to my subject. As I said, came along in 1994. All the duties and quantitative restrictions were removed as on time and on schedule. And this is the world's largest FTA, although you're working on a larger one over here. But 450 million people producing $17 trillion worth of goods and services. Well, I only show this slide because that dotted line is when NAFTA was implemented, and that was sort of a takeoff point. Now, was it all due to NAFTA? No, but the economic integration across the border into Mexico and Canada was fostered. And with the Internet, that can happen with Korea and the United States. So we're at a takeoff point, March 12th, 2012. When the agreement came into effect between U.S. and Korea. And trade has grown. These are just numbers, but trade has grown dramatically. $1.6 trillion is a lot, and those are old numbers, and they're growing in goods and services trade within NAFTA across borders. I I want to talk a bit about dispute settlement once I get. Not everything works smoothly, and therefore there's dispute settlement. But it is not just when there's a problem, it's to prevent problems. Because if a country knows that it will be held responsible for its actions, that deters conduct that would be harmful to international trade or investment. State-to-state disputes, therefore, are rare in NAFTA. In other words, we don't sue each other as countries because we can read the agreement, we know what the rules are, we tend to live up to the rules. Not always, but governments tend to live up to their international obligations. Now, what happens when you fail? First, there are consultations provided for. They are first at a level of bureaucrats, and then they get to the level of ministers. They try to solve the problem. If that doesn't work, it goes to a dispute panel. Dispute panel are simply 3 arbitrators, one from each country and one who is not from either country. They are to make their findings in a relatively fast, I mean, this is sort of light speed for lawyers and judges. 180 days. They're to make their decision, their findings, their recommendations, and they're to specify a remedy. And if there's non-compliance, if the country won't go along, which is rare, but sometimes it happens, there can be retaliation in the form of withdrawing of what the other country agreed to do in response, as part of its bargain, and there can be fines. The U.S. had a problem with Brazil that we give cotton subsidies, and that harms Brazilian farmers. And we found it politically impossible to remove the subsidies to our farmers. It simply proved to be something that could not happen very readily because of politics. So what do? We paid the Brazilian farmers too, which is sort of insane, but it solved the problem for the moment. Temporary solution. These are lawyer terms, non-self-executing. All that means is the decision of the panel does not take effect in the country that lost the case. The country has to decide whether it's going to comply, whether it's going to get retaliated against, or whether it's going to pay compensation. But it doesn't have immediate effect. Our dispute, if we brought a case against Korea, we can't change Korean law. And if Korea brings a case against the United States, you can't change American law. But we, our governments, are responsible for living up to the agreement, and we have to pay a price if we don't live up to it, or we actually, usually we change. We do live up to it. One thing that was very problematic is, this was an example under NAFTA of state-to-state dispute settlement. Cross-border trucking. For whatever reason, the United States felt, and there was a lot of politics involved, that it wasn't Russian at all, sorry, Mexican trucks were not particularly safe. However, the way we went about our dealing with this problem was to just more or less declare the Mexican trucks unsafe without applying that to other countries, without applying that in the same way to our own truckers. It was a violation of national treatment. We didn't give the best treatment we give to our own people that we should have given to the Mexicans, and we were found to be illegal. It's been solved. We are in a program of giving national treatment to, it's being phased in, but it's allowing the Mexicans who live up to our standards to truck things across the border. Very important to businesses, investor-state arbitration. This is something that Korea insists upon in its agreements. It's having a little bit of trouble getting the Australians to agree to this because the Australians don't like it at all. But it is something that I was a skeptic about it, but I must say it actually works. And what it says is that you have to give investors from the other party in NAFTA national treatment and non-discriminatory treatment. You can't treat Mexican or Canadian investors more poorly than you'd treat a European investor. And if you don't get that, you as a business can sue. And you sue and you go to, again, to a panel under international arbitration rules. And what you do is you put in a notice that you need to arbitrate, you want to arbitrate. It can't be any earlier than 6 months after the problem has occurred. It can't be older than 3 years after you knew there was a problem. You don't have to go through your domestic courts. You can bring it right away to a NAFTA panel. One person is each appointed by each party, and the third is chosen by agreement of the parties. And if they can't agree, then the International Arbitration Board, wherever you had the arbitration, whoever rules you're using, they'll make the appointment. And there are public hearings. It's open, it's transparent, and international law is applied. You can have monetary damages. You can get restitution, meaning you get back what you were supposed to get, and you can get attorney's fees, not something that we are completely uninterested in, and enforcement by the courts of your own country. Here's just a few examples. So to give this some reality, actually waste flows across borders. It's a big business. Canada put a ban on the export from the United States of certain waste products, PCBs, from Canada to the United States in 1995. The company that had the license to export said, well, wait a minute, we lost our contract, we lost our customers, you've interfered with us. There was a good record that showed that the reason the ban was put into place was to protect Canadian processes of waste. It wasn't that the Canadians were unhappy with processing the waste to make it non-toxic. It's simply they said, it will help our people if we don't let your people into our country. They lost. The Canada lost, and damages were awarded. Another company, again, we're in the hazardous waste business here for some reason. A U.S. company purchased a Mexican company to operate a hazardous waste landfill. And the Mexican federal and state governments approved the license. But the city that it was near said, nah, we're not doing that, and destroyed the value of the investment completely. And this case serves for one proposition, namely, the federal government or the central government is responsible for the actions of its subdivisions, its states, its localities. You promised that you would give national treatment. You expropriated through no action of the federal government, the central government, but the state, in the city, expropriated the value of that contract. You sue, you win. Not huge, but if you're a small and medium business and you invested in a business, $16.7 million, that actually could be money. 15 cases have been filed against the U.S. under NAFTA. You don't always win. In the United States, in these agreements on government procurement, it is not subcentral, not city, not state procurement that's covered. These folks sued, the ADF group sued, and they learned that maybe they could have read the agreement. But they thought, well, it's federal money, it's going into highway construction, but it was the state that was doing the procurement. The panel held this agreement doesn't cover state procurement. You had no rights. Government procurement works by covered entities, meaning you have to list the entity that is doing the purchasing to have it covered by the agreement. Now, here we have BSE, a subject that's come up in this country, where the cows fall over, and people who are eating them are not in great shape afterwards. The panel held that it just simply had no jurisdiction, not because it wasn't a standards issue, not because it wasn't a problem that these cows had bovine spongiform, and anyone who can pronounce that is probably better than I am, encephalopathy, something like that, and the interpreter can do a better job than I can. BSE. But there was no investor involved. Well, the company can't sue as an investor if it's not an investor, so they didn't win that one. Another one, Canadian softwood lumber case. There's an agreement between U.S. and Canada because Canada has subsidies. They give away their trees to their lumber companies, and that's a subsidy, and the two governments worked out an agreement, and it's simply that since the two countries have an agreement that superseded, in effect, the FTA, the Canadian side lost. It was not found to be a denying minimum standard of fairness. The two governments had agreed to what was fair in that case. There are labor and environment provisions as well. There's a right of retaliation. This is new and different, a right of retaliation if there's a breach in labor or environment. It had been just a fine. What's involved in labor? Freedom of association, elimination of compulsory labor, prohibition on child labor, elimination of employment discrimination. So there can be retaliation for violation of those obligations. Dispute settlement in labor, again, consultation. You go to a Labor Affairs Council, which is a binational, two governments council. There's a joint committee that can be brought in to discuss it. And again, dispute settlement, retaliation, but there can be agreement on both sides to just simply pay a fine. Similarly with environment, I won't go through it, but all of us, Korea, U.S., have agreed to multilateral, meaning many country agreements on the environment, and these are enforceable agreements. And you go through a similar set of steps to get to the end, retaliation or fine. Autos was very contentious because highly political issue between the United States and Korea. If there's a material violation, a material effect, there's a joint committee that takes it up. Fast track, much faster than the other types of dispute settlement, and there can be a snapback of the tariff. Not the world's biggest deal, perhaps, because the U.S. tariff's only 2.5%. Korea's 8%, slightly bigger deal. It does not snap back the truck tariff to 25%. It would only go to 2.5% if there were a violation. You cannot force your government to bring a case, and you cannot sue the other government in state-to-state dispute settlement. The governments have to decide whether they want to bring a case, but you will be staffing it. They don't know about autos or phytosanitary standards or any of the subjects that are covered here. You know your own business. You know what was. They know what the agreement says. You know what the facts are. So you have to support your government. We're now getting to besides going to panel, the fact that what was written in NAFTA was not the end, and therefore it will not be with chorus the end of the process. U.S. and Mexico entered into an agreement just last year, so some 18 or so years after the agreement was entered into with NAFTA, on recognizing each other's tests for conformity on telecommunications. Obviously, you need to test any communications device for conformity, otherwise it won't work. It's got to be able to work. It can't interfere with television signals if it's a phone. So mutual recognition was decided to be accepted. That didn't mean that we could change what the other NAFTA countries did. It meant that if it met the same standards requirements, the same safety requirements, we would accept Mexican testing to meet those standards, and vice versa, and Canadian as well. So this affects a lot of things that Korea makes. That's why I use this example. It's part of the ongoing process of continually improving the agreement to make sure trade flows freely. And Mexican mobile phone business has grown dramatically. Both the customer use and the imports have grown dramatically, in large part because in effect, we removed the border. And in Chorus, there's also a system for conformity assessment, accepting the other country's testing requirements. So there's a momentum for further integration, removal of barriers. There's a change in attitude. If there's a problem, once this starts going, once the committees start meeting, once the customs people start talking to each other, there's an attitudinal change. I talked to our chief negotiator, of course, before I came over here. And I talked to some of the others who were in Congress, staff who dealt with this, and they said there's an attitudinal change of wanting to solve problems because they know who's on the other side. They know who their opposite number is. So instead of saying, why should we let that thing into our country? Why should we accept that standard? They get on the phone or write an email and they say, we got this problem. What do you say about it? And they work it out. So the big thing is an attitudinal change, not just rules, but human beings talking to each other and solving problems. And what we can do to help is we know who to go to. We know who they are. We know what their attitude is. And we can help facilitate that, just like I assume that there are others in this country who have a good familiarity with a number of officials here. So it's called sort of evergreen working groups, always making improvements, always being, in spite of the winter here, always making improvements, evergreen. Now, 2 words and maybe 2 slides on what else are we doing, because you had that slide up there of the great promiscuity of your FTA negotiators. Actually, they're working very hard to open up foreign markets for you with anybody who will sit still long enough and who has a good enough market to negotiate with. What do we care about? We care about implementing Chorus. We care about making NAFTA, improving NAFTA. We care about integrating. One of the problems it's called sort of a spaghetti bowl. You saw issues of rules of origin, and yarn into fabric, into clothing, and what was acceptable under an agreement, what wasn't acceptable. Someday you have to sit down and you look at this mess of agreements on the table and you say, well, how do we actually make sense of all of this and make them fit together? We have not done that yet in our country, but it's a chore that some unhappy trade negotiators in the future will have to work on, Namely, you don't want to really maintain separate lines of production for every country you deal with. You want to be able to say, it's impractical. You have bins of chips, semiconductors, and you want to make a smartphone or some other device, electronic device, or a television, or a set-top box, or a what used to be a fax machine, probably doesn't exist anymore, computers. And you don't want to say, well, I got a bin that these were tested and assembled in Brunei, and this one was in Malaysia, and this one was in Philippines, and this one was in some other place. What you want to do is say, today I'm using those because they came in and I need them and I'm going to plug them in here. And I don't have to look at the circuit board and say, what's the value of regional content on that circuit board of all these things that got plugged into it. So someday we have to work on making sure that it'll only put half of Kita people out of business. They'll find other things to do. But someday what you want to do is say, I'm reaching into the bin because that's the chip I want. I don't care where it was assembled or tested or fabricated. In the WTO, we want an international services agreement. Not easy. Not at all easy, because it's very complex. What services will we allow others to supply in our market? And there's the beginning of an effort in Geneva to bring that to bear fruit. The information technology agreement. We have a difference of opinion with Korea and Japan. We say information technology, smartphones, computers, servers, these things are information technology. And Korea and Japan, for economic reasons, say, look at this refrigerator. It actually plays Kamnam. Is that the style? It's a smart refrigerator or a smart washing machine. And we say, well, wait a minute, you got to draw the line somewhere. It's a very smart refrigerator, we know that, but it's not an information technology product. Well, there's a difference of opinion. Once we get through that difference of opinion, then we'll be able to have an expanded zero tariff information technology agreement. Trans-Pacific Partnership, now 11 countries. I go from here to Auckland for the next round of negotiations. Canada and Mexico just came in. It's looked a little bit random. Each country sort of touches the Pacific, and some that do touch it aren't in it. But it holds the promise of creating new obligations of a different sort on state-owned enterprises, which Vietnam has, Malaysia has, and how they conduct themselves when they're in commercial discussions, in commercial dealings. We hope to finish that in 2013. We hope that we can agree with our folks across the Atlantic with the EU. The EU has spent the last several decades just growing larger and larger, and they still have Macedonia and Kosovo, and someday, I doubt it, but someday maybe Turkey. They keep it. They spent all of their energies on growing larger. So there are 27 countries now. They may grow larger still, but they turned to us in the U.S. And we had two negotiators sitting down talking about agriculture, and always a difficult subject with Europe. And the U.S. agriculture negotiator said, 200 years ago, all of the innovative people in Europe who really were ingenious and inventive emigrated to the United States, and now we have to deal with you people. So it's always it's been difficult to deal with Europe. They are as developed as we are. They have they have a larger population, but they They are similar in so many ways to the United States, and when people are similar, it's almost impossible to deal with them. We always had our biggest arguments with the Canadians because we spoke the same language, couldn't see eye to eye on anything. So these are the countries that are participating. You have it in your book. I won't go over it. Services are in unless they're excluded. That's a difference. That's important. Disciplines, I said on state-owned enterprises is important. Regulatory coherence means, at least in your own country, make sure that different agencies don't have same subject regulated in a different way. So coordinate a little bit internally. And this just says that it's worth, hundreds of billions of dollars if it ever happens, and free trade potential gains of 1.9 trillion. It's possible. It could well happen. I hope it will. So my conclusions, and you were probably hoping that I would end at some point. And this, I'm getting there. No, he says, go on forever. Identify where the opportunities are. You have Kita to help you do that. Identify the opportunities, as well as where there may be some difficulties, or where there are areas which could stand improvement. Engage actively with the two governments. Quite serious about this. The governments are very dedicated individuals who are not omniscient. They don't know everything. They don't know your businesses. You know your businesses. So you have to go in and you say, well, wait a minute. I have this textile that I can't get from here to there, or this electronic product that isn't quite fitting in some of the categories, or there's a standard that someone adopted. I can't ship my product. You have to go in and engage, and you have help from us in our law firm. You have help from Kita. And the story of NAFTA is that the progress continues. The governments work with each other. It is a phenomenal success. And Chorus promises to be the same phenomenal success. And it will create new opportunities. It will create better standards, the common standards. It will provide additional market access. It will facilitate trade and investment. And there will be other negotiations, continuing negotiations. You have to understand, and you have Kita to help you, we have us to help you, how solutions can be delivered. You should understand your rights, or consult people who do know what your rights are and what your government's rights are. But only you can make this work. Governments don't sell anything except propaganda. So that's an unkind statement. It's just true. You will make this happen. So consider how we can be of assistance. That's why we're here. Consider how Kita can be, to identify opportunities, to expand what's there. Don't take anything for granted. If there's an obstacle, work on it. It can be changed. And that doesn't mean you can sell to Iran tomorrow, but most obstacles can be changed. Anticipate the problems, support what the governments are doing in their diplomatic efforts, and where you have to bring litigation, bring litigation. Often it doesn't mean going through the whole panel process. It means governments settle, or it gets worked out. That's why there are only relatively few cases, because governments actually do live up to their obligations. Thank you very much.